is going to be Boone Zimmerlee, the Project Wildfire Director and the Deschutes County Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator. So hello, Boone. How are you doing today?
Good. Let me get my screen up here. Oops. Get my screen up here sharing. Okay. Close that. So let me, I'll introduce myself and I want to show something after I do, but let me get rolling here. So like Lori said, I'm Boone Zimmerlee. I work for Deschutes County as the Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator. And then within that, I got a couple programs that I administer, and one of them is Project Wildfire. And so Project Wildfire is a larger group that encompasses a lot of our partners across all the agencies, whether basically we try to span that gap from the federal side all the way down to the private individual landowner or the private residents. And we hope to, we do just what it says here. We aim to prevent deaths, injuries, property loss, and environmental damage resulting from wildfires in Deschutes County. And one of the things I just thought maybe, oops, I think my keypad quit working. So our webpage, so projectwildfire.org, which I'll drop in the chat, has quite a few communities or resources for community members to find and locate, right? So a lot of stuff, community wildfire protection plans, Kip mentioned those earlier. I'm not going to go into depth about them, but that's one of the things we do. We help to educate on evacuations and help you plan for that. We administer some of those programs under Firewise, so we coordinate with a lot of our local partners and HOAs and communities. Whether you have an HOA or not, we try to help you strive towards that recognition status. Fire Adapted Communities as a whole, there's a whole network that we also engage with. We also help to promote, and we try to help to promote, but also spread the good messaging around prescribed burning, because that is part of the bigger picture of where we're at. So actually I'll get to that slide in a moment, but we help to support that. We've also got a steering committee, and you can find some notes on our steering committee there, along with the past recordings. So every month we have a steering committee meeting, and then usually we pick a topic, we talk through that topic. I record those and then post them up to our webpage at projectwildfire.org if you wanted to check those out. I apologize too if Prezi makes people sick. It kind of flies around everywhere. It can almost make you seasick at times. So Project Wildfire has been around for a little while, and that's not really the focus of my talk, but I just wanted to make sure that we're kind of illustrating that point that, right, there's quite a few pieces of what we do here. And we are coordinating between everybody. So, you can go around that corner, that loop there, and you'll see a lot of stuff. But I wanted to really focus more in on the education and the evacuations today. Lori had asked me about it. It's not normally my bigger topic that I talk about. I often turn that over to emergency management to talk about that. But I do have resources and provide kind of the guidance of where we should be going and what we should be thinking about when it's time to think about evacuations. I mentioned CWPPs earlier, but those are one of the documents that helps us identify the priorities when we think about wildland fire, how that's going to impact us. We identify what we're going to be working on first. All of our cooperators and partners are in there. It's a non-regulatory document, but it's a place for us to share ideas and talk about what we're doing and be able to link our projects together so that we're not duplicating efforts, but instead we're getting together and having more of an aggregate effect together. Fire Free, let me see here. Fire Free is one of the programs that I also help to administer, and a lot of folks I think are familiar with Fire Free on the, sorry, one second here, putting another thing in the chat. Fire Free is one of our programs. Most people are familiar with the events that we hold, where it's free yard debris drop-off. That's a partnership with Deschutes County Waste Management that's going on right now. So that link I just put in there will take you to the page that talks about the events that are happening. So as we ask for people to do their defensible space, like Kip talked about, we also want to make sure that we're providing them with resources to accomplish that. So Fire Free is education, but also it's events that we hold to be able to allow people to get rid of that debris so that they can do their part of defensible space. Our partnerships, I left this slide in there, but we work across anything from individual projects within a community to do fuels reduction to projects that we're working on the broader landscape and the broader scale for working across all of our ownership, whether it's federal or private or state. So the part that I wanted to talk about, sorry to talk fast through all that other stuff, but I kind of want to give a preview of everything that we have under our umbrella. Evacuations. So evacuations have been a pretty big topic with folks ever since we've had the Campfire and some of the other fires in Northern California, like the Fire, and just, you know, we hear some real horrific stories along with everything on the west side of Oregon. I don't mean to glance over that, but everything that happened on the west side of Oregon. And, you know, and a lot of times what I end up with people asking me is like, well, where's the map to show me those routes, right? And I guess I look at it like, well, we are identifying those routes, and we do have people that are dedicated to that. And this is something that we've been doing for a long time. You know, with, like Kip said, we have like a 5 to 25 year fire return interval. So we're used to having some of those fires happening and evacuating neighborhoods. But I think the one thing to remember is whether there's a sign or not, the route you came in is generally the route you're going to take back out. We're going to have emergency management out there to help direct people and get them out and do it in a safe, orderly manner. But the piece that I think that we need to think about is kind of like how we picture or how we fit into that big circle I showed earlier of all the partners and everybody that we have, is like, where is our piece as we plan out our evacuation, and how do we fit into that as a resident? Because believe me, I'm in that circle as well. And that's just kind of knowing first what our evacuation basics are, and then preparing, and that's preparing ourselves, our loved ones, and then staying informed. So right, we have the 3 levels that are universal across all of the state. And for the most part, most all Western states, if not all the states, use the 3 levels of the ready, set, go. Excuse me. And there's very small subtleties between those, between states and between entities that are using it. And it's quite subtle, right? So if we have a fire and it's in landscape and we see it, and not always do we go level 1, then 2, then 3, but we do identify what's at risk. And we do notify and work directly with emergency management. So the sheriff's office generally, because the sheriff has ultimate control of evacuations. But it goes through the 3, right? Get ready. So we want to make sure that we're ready for the potential evacuation. And that means that we should way before any of this level 1, 2, or 3, we should already have our go bags prepped. We should already be thinking about what we're taking with us, and that should be ready to roll. But first we started in that get ready, just letting you know that there's a fire out there. The get set, so that's the beginning to move everything into your car, getting prepped to drive away, and into that level 3 of go now, evacuate now. And not always when we put somebody into level 1 doesn't mean they're going to get to level 2, then to 3. And it also doesn't mean that we go 1, 2, 3. We might jump straight to 3 depending on where the fire is and how it happens, right? Fires, as we know, are not a planned event for the most part. Yeah, I'll come back to some of that. So knowing our 3 levels, building a go bag. These are all resources too. I want to say that they're actually on our Project Wildfire webpage. So if you want to know more about what those 3 levels are, you can find those on the webpage. There's a whole page dedicated to building a go bag, what you should be thinking about in terms of putting in it and how to prep yourself. And then there's also resources for preparing loved ones. And that's anything from preparing our kids, talking to them about what it means when we need to be packing our things up and leaving, or preparing loved ones like older folks or even our pets, of knowing what we're going to do with our pets if there is a evacuation. And then the last part is considering any of our special needs, right? So if you're evacuating older parents or something like that, we need to be thinking about medications and what we need to take with them. So there's some special circumstances in there. And a lot of those resources, like I said, are on the Project Wildfire webpage. Here are just a couple of resources. You can link to these off of the webpage as well. The one on the left is a little booklet. So if you're planning out evacuation and you're preparing yourself, this thing flips out and you can kind of write down and take notes of emergency numbers and kind of what you're planning out. But that's a great resource to have planned out early in the year to think about it. And then the side on the right is more of what we We often hand that out when there is a fire in the area, just so we have people thinking about it. But we also go on a campaign early in the summer through midsummer to make sure people are thinking about evacuations and building their go bags. And you know, and I'm really focused today, and I apologize for a little bit, but you know, really focus on the side of the individual preparing, right? Because you know, I think there's going to be lots of questions out there about like, what are the right roads? Why isn't it signed? All that stuff. But right, if you drove into your neighborhood, you probably don't need signs to tell you how to drive back out. And that's what we really need to be thinking about, is like, how are we prepared to drive out? Do we have our go bag? Because that's what's going to burn up the most time, is figuring out what you need to be putting into your car. But if you have that already done, all you have to do is turn, grab it, throw it in the car, and drive away. Okay, continue on. And the last piece is staying informed. So a couple of websites. This one here is Central Oregon, centraloregonfire.org. And I'm actually going to share that over here. You can come onto this website, and this is a website that we put together in partnership with DEQ, OHA, and Department of Health Services here in Deschutes County, along with the Forest Service, BLM, Oregon Department of Forestry, and a few others. But we put this together to pull everything together into one place. So if you're wanting to know what's going on with the smoke that you see outside, you can come in here and find out, oh, they got a prescribed burn going on. That's where our smoke's coming from. You can come up here and you've got resources for your smoke and your health. And there's some interactive maps here as well, which will show you where those burns are happening, but also all those resources that quite a few of those resources that Peter just talked about with our air quality index is embedded in here too. So it's one place, so you don't have to go searching through the internet to find all that. And then there's also lots of resources about your health and how to plan around the N95 kind of situation to keep your air nice and clean. Okay, so centraloregonfire.org. You can also sign up for text messages when there is a prescribed fire or a wildfire going on. And this isn't an emergencies. This is just to let you know where the smoke is coming from. So staying informed on emergencies is the DeschutesAlerts.org. So that's where you sign up to make sure that your email or your phone number and everything is correct, so that if there is a fire emergency and we're going into level 1, 2, or 3 and you're within that area, or you've signed up for those alerts, you're going to get those alerts on your phone and you're going to know about it. So you want to make sure that you sign up there if you're wanting to know exactly when it's happening. Otherwise, it's it'll be the basics of what we've done for decades, right, of driving through communities and getting people out. But if you want to get on to the text alerts and be informed, this is where you want to go, DeschutesAlerts.org. I'm talking pretty fast, and I've got lots of things that I could cover in here, but that's what I've kind of put together for evacuations today. There's a lot of other resources here. Kip touched on some of them earlier, like the Firewise stuff. I've actually got a, if you're curious more about Deschutes County and what we have going for Firewise, I'll put another link in here. It looks like maybe I've got a couple of chats that I haven't looked at, but anyway, that's what we have. There's lots of other resources in there. You can fumble through the Project Wildfire webpage to find a lot of that. A lot more resources to go a little bit deeper in there. And by all means, you can contact me through the email contacts that are in those websites.
All right, thank you so much, Boone, for sharing. Yeah, sorry we're kind of rushed through it all, but you gave some great information, and definitely was helpful, again, for being prepared for evacuations. And as you say, some of those routes that people are very concerned about, a lot of it is, if you live in your neighborhood or live in wherever you are, for the most part, if you can just get out to a major road, then that's where there will be more information or emergency folks directing you the proper way to go. Excellent. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So now we are going to move on to our final speaker, Stefanie Krantz. So move there. All right. So Stefanie is going to talk to us a little bit about wildfires and climate change. And let me open up her presentation here. All right. Thank you so much, Stefanie. Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank Lori for organizing this and the former speakers for their excellent talks. You know, part of my job at the Nez Perce Tribe is to educate people about climate change and how to plan for it. And, you know, the situation we're in today has, I think, brought some people to their knees and shown them that climate change can cause the effects that scientists have projected for many, many years. And I think it's important for communities to arm themselves with information about what to expect in the future. And so, you know, for this talk, I looked up some climate projections for Bend, and I'm going to share that. But before I do that, I just want to give my very, very brief, you know, 3 or 4 sentence climate change lesson. So basically, it is true that the climate has always changed, but in the last several million years, there has been less than 300 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And all of human evolution has occurred in that climate. The level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today is approximately 415 parts per million, which is dramatically more than what the species on this planet have evolved with. Were we to continue with the business as usual scenario and keep doing what we're doing, the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by 2100 will be 1200 parts per million, 4 times what it is today, and 5 times what it has been in all of human evolution and in the evolution of all the species that we share this planet with. That is an unbelievably dramatic and rapid change, and that going down that path is basically a terrible idea. It's setting us up for a mass extinction and for a lot more suffering. What I will say is that lots and lots of people, millions of people, are trying to avoid that, and that we have everything that we need to know, and everything, all the technology needed, and plenty of money to get down to 350 parts per million and stay there, and to do it very, very rapidly. What's missing is the societal and political will. And one thing I've really appreciated about 350 is that they have made it clear that their mission is to get back down to 350 parts per million, which is a survivable climate for all of us. And, you know, I think when you see the projections that are coming, you'll understand why it's so important to mitigate our effects on the climate while also protecting ourselves from the impacts of climate change. Next slide. So I went to the Climate Toolbox, which was hosted originally by the University of Idaho. It's a wonderful website, and you can look up all sorts of climate projections. You can put in your city or an area and learn about what the future could hold. In this case, I'm sorry that these graphs are a little bit hard to see, but I'm just hoping that you'll go to this website and explore these resources. So this is extreme fire days with the higher emissions business as usual scenario. And as you can see, it goes from 10 days in the past to up to 30 days by the end of the century of extreme fire danger days. Next slide, please. It's going to be a lot hotter in Bend. I used Bend, Oregon as my example. You know, the hottest summer days could go from the mid-90s up to 114 degrees. And that will increase throughout the century, again, if we keep on the pathway that we're on today. The heat index, which is really important in terms of emergency management, could go up to above 60 days from less than 10. So a lot more people exposed to heat in the summer and a lot more fire danger because of it. Next slide. It's also going to be a lot drier in the west. There'll be less winter snow and snowpack and a lot more days above freezing. And the way that most people experience climate change is the way that temperature changes water and hydrology of ecosystems. Next slide, please. And in the case of Bend, a lot of the dryness will be felt in the summer months. So it's already hot and dry in Bend in the summer, and the fire risk is high. And if precipitation gets even lower in the summer, that risk will be greater. Next slide, please. Another thing to keep in mind is that animals are already on the move, and the range shifts have been modeled for many, many species. The Nature Conservancy has this amazing website, which I'd really recommend exploring, that shows the pathway of many, many species moving north and into new areas in the next century. Next slide, please. So one of the ways to plan for the future is to think about the closest climate analog. So the city of Bend, the way it is today, what will it be like by the end of the century? And there's a study that looked at 540 North American urban areas, and Outdoor Magazine actually published an article about the 10 best outdoor towns to live in, and Bend was one of them. And basically, Bend is going to be a lot more like Spanish Springs, Nevada than it is like Bend, Oregon. So, in my case, I live in Clarkston, Washington, and it's going to be more like the Central Valley of California. So when I think about my yard, I'm starting to plant species that occur in California and in Idaho and Washington. Next slide. So, using that information, I went and looked at the Deschutes Land Trust and their recommendations for pollinator-friendly plants. Thinking about the future, animals on the move, I want to make sure that, at least for my part, I'm providing continuous habitat for animals on the move, but also using plants that are water-wise, fire-safe, and create beautiful landscapes. And refugia, basically habitat refugia. So I looked at the recommendations for pollinator plants in Deschutes and compared them to the recommendations for pollinator plants in Nevada. And there's a lot of species overlap between those two areas even today, even though their climates are pretty different. And so many low growing, beautiful native species could be selected from either area that would last into perpetuity in a changing landscape. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to show some pictures from the Campfire. I was in California when Paradise caught on fire, taking a solar class about 100 miles away as the crow flies, and the ashes from this fire landed on us that morning. I used to live in California, and many of my friends have lost their homes. Communities I've lived in have burned halfway to the ground, and I have been joining groups for survivors of wildfire to learn as much as I can about what's going on with these fires from the perspective of what can we do in a changing climate. And I'm just hoping that, yes, I will provide those hyperlinks, and then you can have my presentation. So these pictures are from Paradise, California after the fire. And the first thing that I'd like to point out is in these images, look for the living trees and the lawns. Which trees burned down? What happened to all the houses? I mean, it's very clear from these images that the forest and the trees did a lot better than our houses. And in some cases, there's even green lawns next to houses that didn't burn down and did burn down, and living trees interspersed with the dead trees. Like, The row of trees in between the houses is burned to a crisp. The trees on the outside, their fuel letters are burned up, but the crowns are still alive. And, you know, from looking at this, the first thing that I would say is something about the way that we build houses is not working in the forest and in the wildland urban interface. And, you know, given that the amount of energy that we use is directly tied to the kind of car that we drive and the sorts of dwellings that we live in, there are ways to build fire-safe homes that use less energy, that mitigate our impact on the climate, and keep us safer and our communities safer. Next slide, please. So here's a great example. You know, I found this link on CNBC of a fire-resistant home where they're doing research to test what sorts of homes. That's the image on the left. And then the other two homes, I hope you can still hear me. It says my internet connection is unstable. The other two homes are straw bale homes. One's in Boulder, California, and the other is in Moab. This home with the red roof on the right was built by Community Rebuilds. It's a straw bale home that is net zero and was built by community members for about $50,000. One of the things I think about with all these wildfires and with tens of thousands of homes burning down and a housing crisis in the West now is how can we rebuild smarter with local materials and locally sourced materials that are earth-based, more sustainable, healthier for us, healthier when they burn, and keep us safer. So looking at alternative building ideas and not only thinking about how to protect your existing home, but how to help neighbors that have lost their homes to rebuild in a fire-safe way and in a climate-safe way, I think is something that we really need to start thinking about. Next slide, please. Another thing that I want to draw attention to is that, you know, the tremendous wildfires in, you know, the Western United States and in other parts of the world like Australia have left a lot of animals high and dry. And during droughts, animals really struggle to get water. So, you know, usually most people recommend not feeding animals and not giving them water. But during a crazy drought year like this year, offering water that's safe and clean to wildlife can make a big difference for animals. And that's something that we'll all have to think about in the future if we want to keep some of our the other species around with us. Next slide, please. So I'd also like to encourage you to look into solar for emergency management, for, you know, keeping telecommunications open during fire response and for mitigating our impacts on climate change. Next slide, please. The state of Oregon and the city of Bend have done some climate change planning, and there's great resources already available, and getting involved can make a difference for your community. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to thank you and leave you with an image of a healthy fire burning on the floor of the forest and taking some of the smaller trees. Fire has always been a part of these ecosystems, and it's upon us all to learn how to live with nature and protect nature and ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefanie. That was an excellent presentation about how wildfires and climate change are very much tied together. And thank you so much for doing that research ahead of time on the Bend area here in Central Oregon for all of us. That was definitely very eye-opening for me to just see those projections that it looks like we're going to be getting hotter and drier, which just spells even worse case scenarios for continued wildfires in our region. And I'm sure that's a very similar story all throughout the Northwest.